Well, hey, good morning, everybody. Here we are at, what are we doing here today, B? We're doing Weathering Basics Part 2. Everyone was asking about who's the lovely big head that popped up in the screen before.
Dad thought it was a good idea. Introduced myself. My name's Belinda, his daughter.
Yeah, I've known Binny all her life, and she's been always with me with modeling. In actual fact, Belinda helps me with my kit manufacturing. I do a lot of kits for balsa build kits, which we're going to do some builds videos as well on those. But Belinda does all the administrative work, all the packing, all the stuff that it's amazing how much work she does. In actual fact, I couldn't really do it without her. So
I used to always whine about being bored when I was younger. I have not been bored, at least for the past half year. So things are good for me.
Yeah, if you ever want to come and hang out with Bea, she'll be in the garage packing boxes or doing something. In actual fact, I'm going to teach you how to drive the laser to take a little pressure off a bit. Anyway, you guys came to see a little bit more about weathering, so based on the great response last time, we thought we'd do a little follow-on. There's a few more things I can show you. And just a caveat, a lot of the stuff I'm showing you are not my original, as somebody says, Bob Ross. I had to Google who the heck that guy was. These are just things that are passed on to me, so it's the right thing to do to keep passing them on, and then your kids can grow up and they can pass them on and the whole system keeps alive. That's how everything works. Not many people have an original idea, so it's important to take those ideas and share them as much as you can. So we're going to get on to, today we're going to talk about some other techniques. We're going to do some raised panels, show you some riveting, and we're going to be in landscape today.
There we go. Just got to work the kinks out.
So yeah, thanks for all the comments. It's a little humbling. I appreciate you guys supporting this, and what's more important, I appreciate you guys sharing it as much as you can, because as I said, I'm not about me, but I love to teach and I love to share what I know, and hopefully you guys can share this as well. Belinda told me to smile more. It's hard to talk and smile, but I'll do my best.
Smile with your eyes, Dad.
So we're going to work, first thing I'm going to do, because of a timing thing, I'm going to show you, and this is kind of part of weathering, it's part of building up the detail of the model. So we're going to show you how to do a raised panel. That won't take long, but it's part of the whole process. So weathering isn't just adding paint, it's adding detail to the aircraft. A raised panel obviously is like a hatch. I've got a little piece of G10 here, and I'm going to do this very quickly. This stuff is like the best stuff. It's called Evercoat. It's a metal glaze. It's actually for the auto industry, but it's a very fine kind of Bondo, I guess is the best way to explain it. It dries super quick, and it's really, really good to work with for doing raised panels and filleting and so forth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to imagine we wanted to have a panel on the aircraft. So what you do basically is you mask off, or you can even cut a vinyl stencil, and the thicker the material is, the higher the panel will be. So one layer of masking tape will give us X, but I'm going to do 2 layers just because it'll show up better in the camera. This is kind of like, you guys say I build fast. Well, when you do a video, it's kind of like speed building, because you want to try and get to the point you're trying to make as fast as possible. Okay, so this is 2 layers of masking tape. Now masking tape is great because nothing kind of really sticks to it, at least from a chemical standpoint. Water-based products stick to it pretty good. Now this Evercoat is a polyester material. It's this jar's getting a little down in its tooth there, but as you can see, it's like the consistent of a runny peanut butter, and then you've got the catalyzed. You guys are going to ask me for measurements here, but I'm just going to give that a little mix up. My other hardener's loaned out to a buddy, so maybe he could bring that back soon, but this one should do the job. And this is over-catalyzed. This is way more hardener than I need, but I want it to dry quick. Now this will actually dry, and I can sand it in about probably 3 or 4 minutes. It's super fast, especially with the amount of catalyst I just put in that. as someone once said, this is like watching paint dry. Well, we'll try and keep it exciting, but as you can see, I just kind of get it in that area there. Not too worried, just make sure it's covering above the height of the masking tape. Okay, now we're going to put that aside and we're going to come back to that. But I wanted to get that done first, so we've got a little bit of drying time. Then I'm going to move on to some other things. The next thing we're going to teach you today is about riveting. A lot of guys ask me about riveting. There's two types of rivets. There's raised rivets and there's flush rivets. And on most aircraft they use both, unless it's some very specialized kind of high-speed aircraft. Even the World War II aircraft, a lot of the areas of drag they use flush rivets, and then in areas of lower drag they use raised rivets, just because it's easier when you're building a real aircraft to do raised rivets. So we're going to do a little riveting seminar here while we're waiting for that paint to dry, and then we'll move on to some other weathering techniques. Now there's a couple of ways to do rivets. The first thing we're going to do, because we want paint to dry, is we're going to do some raised rivets. And what I'll do is I'll get a little piece of, this is a little piece of fiberglass sheet, which we're going to use as well for other purposes, but for now, this is canopy glue. And let me grab the bottle, because you're all going to ask me what type of canopy glue it is. 1 second, sorry, I should have had that ready. This is the canopy glue. It's a Pacer product. I've been using it for 1,000 years. I'm not sure how long Pacer's been around, but this is the stuff. It's a very rubbery, great for gluing on canopies, but it's also really good for doing rivets. This syringe set you can actually get from Horizon Hobby. It's DLM products sell a range of tips and syringes that come in a little assorted packet, and they have a very fine, a medium, and a coarse tip that goes in the syringe. And I basically load the canopy glue in the syringe, and that becomes the applicator for the rivets. Now this is the coarsest tip, and you can use fine or really fine if you've got some very fine rivets. But again, to show up best on camera, we use the coarsest gun. Now I've got a couple of lines scribed on here, I don't know if you can see those. Okay, so we're just going to clean the tip, make sure it's flowing. Oh, another little trick. You notice I pulled the syringe out of a bottle of water. I learnt this from an old gentleman years ago when I was a kid, because my glue would always dry. He said just throw the top into a bottle of water, especially if you've got your glue in a syringe, and the tip never dries out, and you can leave it there for months like that. I replace the water every now and again, but it just stops the tip from drying up. Cool little tip. Okay, so now we just make sure the tip's clear here. And then again, this is a technique. There's no mechanical way to explain it, but the trick is just to get the same amount of glue coming out each time. That's not bad. Now, rule rivets, sorry, I've had a bit of a cold this week. Rule rivets aren't always dead even, like measured exactly apart. The guys kind of have to get 5 rivets between X amount of space, so they just kind of roughly bang them in. And that's the same when you're doing modeling. It doesn't have to be absolutely purely measured and mechanical. It looks a little synthetic when you do it that way. So, you know, I just kind of guessed how many rivets and kind of spaced them out evenly. And they're sort of straight. They're not perfect, but they're straight enough. And again, if you wanted to do smaller rivets, you could use a smaller tip. If you want to use bigger rivets, you can use no tip. Now you can just screw this out, and it has an exit which is for epoxy and so forth. And we'll give that a shot. I use this technique on the back of the Hawk. It has some very big rivets. And a lot of the times, especially when you're trying to build a super scale model, the rivets are in the wrong place, and that's no complaint to the manufacturer. But I kind of an OCD on accuracy, so I like to put the rivets in the right place. Or often you'll have to rub rivets out or sand them off because you're trying to work on a seam or something, and it's hard to sand around the rivets. So if you know how to put the rivets back, it's not a big deal when you're sanding off the seams. So we're going to let that dry. Now basically that'll dry clear, but it'll dry as a raised, and then we'll squirt some paint on it so you guys can sort of see how it actually looks. No questions yet? Silence? Okay.
I don't know if I have it turned off or what, but...
Okay, now this is dry, but it's not quite ready to sand yet. So we're going to leave that a little longer. And I'm going to show you some other riveting techniques. I'm going to just grab this same piece of carbon fiber, and this one you know about, everyone knows about the old soldering iron and the brass tip. Now this is about a 1/8 rivet. Now the cool thing about this technique is you can use different size tips for different size rivets.
We're all eyes and ears, Steve says.
Now the brass, this is just a regular Weller soldering iron. It's a 40-watt soldering iron, nothing special, except I can, if you look at the end, I can screw in any tip I want. I can go up to about a 1/4 inch rivet if I want, using this technique. Now the trick with this is make sure it gets nice and hot, and this has been on for about half an hour, so it should be pretty much ready. And then basically it's just like everything else, you put the rivets down as you want. So I'm going to do a row of rivets. I'm just going to kind of eyeball this in between. And this material's a little hard for the tip to melt into it, but if you look closely you'll see it. The downside of using the sharpened brass, and I've used stainless steel tube and all kinds of stuff, is, you know, after about 20 minutes, and you'll be riveting for a lot more than 20 minutes, but you have to either sharpen the tip or replace it. It's just the way it goes. There we go. I don't know if that's showing up in the camera okay.
Yep, I'd say so.
Okay, now this is simulating a flush rivet. Obviously it's flush to the surface. Now, if you've looked at aircraft in the museum, you probably haven't paid too much attention to the rivets, but next time you do, I guarantee you will. Have a look. They're not perfectly even and flat and flush with the skin. They kind of move around a little bit because they haven't quite got them in straight. And this technique kind of is good because, you know, I didn't have the plunger dead vertical, so one side of the rivet might be a little more pronounced than the other, and that will show up when you paint it. Obviously right now it's just, you know, in the raw surface. So the final technique, and this one, Graham Mears showed me this trick. Who, any of you in the scale community know Graham? He won Top Gun every single time I was there in Team Scale. A phenomenal builder and a master craftsman, and he showed me this. Basically, if you got an old drill or broken a drill, you sharpen the tip, and if you can zoom in close on the tip B of the drill, basically it's chamfered at about a 45-degree angle with a little cusp on the end of it. You got that?
I'm having a hard time picking it up. But...
Yeah, that's okay. So basically you cut the drill off at a 45-degree angle. It's probably not showing up well in the camera. And what we're going to do is use the Dremel to rotate, so it's going to scribe a sort of circle as it spins. A couple of tricks with this is you've got to have a pretty good Dremel. This one's kind of old and worn out. The shaft moves around a little bit, so I have it right in close to keep it as square as I can. So a nice new Dremel. And if you're too slow on the Dremel speed, this has a variable speed. If you're too slow, it'll wander as well. So I usually do my rivets at a fairly high speed. Now, if you push hard, you're going to go right through the wing. So practice on a piece of fiberglass or something first before you start hammering away at your wing. Now you'll notice on this rivet here, it walked on me. That's because I didn't have the Dremel dead vertical. It's super critical to have the Dremel dead vertical. If you're on an angle, it's going to walk on you. So I definitely practice. I'm a little bit under the weather and I didn't get a good night's sleep, so I'm not quite as steady as I'd like to be. But you can see on these other rivets, this is a great technique on a fiberglass fuselage because the fiberglass is very hard and you can see the soldering iron method does penetrate, but it's not as good as I think as the Dremel. Soldering iron's great though if you want to have a bigger diameter or smaller diameter, and I've got actually a few books and they actually specify what rivets are used on what sections, so you can actually do the math and figure out what rivet size you're actually wanting to do. You guys are like starting to think this scale stuff's crazy, but it's kind of fun. I've told to many people it's not about building the best scale model. It's a history lesson. It's a walk down the path and you're simulating what the real engineers did. You're learning about the aircraft, you're learning about the pilot, you're learning about how it's made, learning about how it's flown. That's all part of scale modeling. It's not just making a nice model. I actually enjoy learning about the model. When it's all done, it's a little sad. It's like, well, now what do I do, So that's why I'm kind of prolific and like, okay, let's do something next. Okay, so we're going to let that dry a little bit and we're going to move on to some more weathering stuff. One of the, last week I talked about oils and washes and pastels, but I never really showed you how they're used. So I'm going to do a little display on some other weathering techniques. I showed you the one I use with the airbrushing. But there are lots of other techniques that guys use, and I'm going to try and run through a couple of them this morning. The first one, these are pastels. Now you can see I've had these for a while. Caroline got these for me. These are called chalk pastels, and these are Weber Costello. I don't know if I got these about 10 years ago and I'm still using them, and they were about $5 10 years ago, so they're probably $10 now. And you can get them in different shades. These are called earth tones, which are perfect for scale modeling. And they're basically called chalk pastels, and they're water soluble. Most chalk pastels are. The oil pastels are oil soluble, and you really don't want to use those. So you want chalk pastels. And we'll open up the box here. You'll see I've been using these forever. Now the chalk pastels are really good when you want a specific, like a harsh streak, so like a grease run out of a seam or something. And this is the bottom of the hawk stab. It'd be good if I didn't get glue on that. And right in here there's a kind of harsh seam, but I don't want to get anything in front of that seam, so I'm going to mask off that line just to stop my fingers and mitts and grubbiness getting past it. And this is Tamiya striping tape. I use it all the time. It's a very thin tape. It doesn't have much build, and it seals the edge really good, and it doesn't pick up the paint after you've painted something. So we're just going to work in this area here just for the sake of the camera. I'm going to grab some black. This is how it comes. You'll see it's just like chalk. And basically we're just going to work it into the, not being that neat, just going to kind of put a couple little spots in here, and I'll probably wipe a couple of these off. And then we're going to put a little bit of kind of red in there as well. And you are like, what the heck is he doing? Okay, so I guess you guys would call this a Bob Ross moment. This is kind of like the run deal. Just grab your finger and pull it back in the flow. And you can keep dragging it back as far as you want, and then you can work it back out. And the cool thing about the pastels, they're water-based, and you can just wipe it off. We'll just pull that off. And then you can see that streaking technique. So you'll see the little slight tones of red. Basically that's a grease and rust build-up in there. And then if you don't like it, or you want to try it again, or you're in the wrong spot, or your angle's wrong, just a little bit of Windex, and it'll come right off. So that's the pastel technique. I don't know if you've got any questions there, but I use that a lot, again, where I've got a real specific streak I want to make. And it's a kind of what I call a harsh streak. It's not just a sort of a weather stain. And that would be typically like a grease spot or whatever. And then the next thing I want to show you is the water-based oil paints. These are kind of water-based oils. They do have a specific thinner, which Caroline pointed out to me, which I was playing around with, and it's actually much smoother than the water. You can wash up and clean up in water. And she says this thing's expensive. She said it's like $40 for this gallon. Now, in modeling terms, that's not very expensive. I seem to spend $40 on anything these days, but it's called Gams oil, and this would last forever. And she said you can get it in smaller bottles, but it's basically a water-based spirits. It's like turpentine, but a water-based version of it. It's odorless. That's why a lot of artists are using it these days. And it's not flammable like turpentine, so they can carry it on airplanes, etc., etc. So, cool product, and we use this as the kind of thinners and the reducer for the oils.
Pete George asked, what do you seal it on with?
You just let it dry, Pete. It's on there forever. That's the problem with oil paints, is once they're dry, I mean, you know, look at Monet and some of the famous artists. Those paintings are 1,000 years old, and they're still, that paint is there forever. So once this paint has dried, and it does take 2 or 3 days for it to completely dry.
And the pastels?
The pastels, I just leave them on. Now, again, with any weathering, it's weathering. It moves around. It's a living thing. It's not like, as soon as you try and seal it, you take away the dimension, because, you know, a pastel's a flat chalk. If you put that on a gloss surface, it's going to look cool. It's going to give dimension. As soon as you seal that, it's going to make everything around it look the same, and it's not going to quite pop as much. So I'd recommend not sealing it. The pastels don't move around that much, and you can add them back in or take them away if you want. I'd recommend not sealing any of these weathering techniques. I'd put a good solid base down before I start any weathering, and that's it. I clear coat it. I use a flat clear or a gloss clear or satin clear, and then I weather on top of it. I was talking to...
There it is. We're back.
Hey, sorry about that. I guess our local network provider just kind of crashed. So what I was saying is, you know, don't seal the weathering. Trust it. It won't move around that much. Just take care of your model. And after you've flown it, you know, you don't need to wipe it down, especially these modern gas engines in a warbird or in a turbine. There's not a lot of residue. I just kind of wipe it down with a tack rag. I don't use any liquid at all. Just dust it off, and that's how it stays. So, you know, don't feel you need to seal anything I'm showing you. It won't just fall away. The pastels in particular are actually quite resilient. Okay, now let's see if you can zoom in here, B. We're going to do the oils next. Now this stuff is highly concentrated. I mentioned last week I basically only use it where I want some really nasty, dirty streaks. And I'm going to mix these a little bit. I'm going to use a little bit of black and a little bit of brown here. Caroline will be proud of me. I call that baby poo brown. And this is the Gams oil, I guess. And again, the thicker you make this, the richer it'll be. We're just going to make that into a kind of paste. This is a fairly thick mix. If I was doing a wash over a whole aeroplane, I'd use a lot thinner. But I wouldn't recommend using this over the whole aeroplane, just because if you get this wrong, it's on there forever. So Phil was telling me a story of a gentleman that he was showing how to do this, and he let it dry overnight, and he had these terrible brush marks and had to sand it all out. So I'll show you. I only leave this on for a few minutes because I'm kind of really sketchy with these oils, but we're going to do a little. We're coming over here. This is my Yak 11 wing. Actually, this is my next project, but for those guys that think I just build jets, I'm actually building a warbird as well. So we're just going to work in these. I don't know how that. We're just going to do these lines here. Just to get a little contrast. That'll do for now. Now, like everything I've shown you, the longer you leave it, the harder it is to get off. So probably if I was doing this for a real weathering situation, I'd probably leave it for about 3 or 4 minutes. But for the sake of the video and your attention span, I'm going to kind of wipe it off pretty quick. But it'll give you the idea of what we're trying to achieve. Now I just use a little bit of Windex to do this. You can use the thinner if you want, but remember it's water-based. Because all I'm trying to do here is have the material stay in the rivets. How's it going there, B?
Pretty good. It's looking good.
I don't know how that showed up on the camera, but it looks like there's a distinct difference between where the oils were and where they weren't. So this is a good technique. Just if you want some really kind of like, as I mentioned, the bottom of the aeroplane's perfect because, you know, no one cleans the bottom of the aeroplanes. I've seen those guys working on the ramps. They clean the sides and the tops, and the bottom's kind of... I shouldn't say that. I know some guys take pride in their work and they probably do clean the bottom, but in general the bottom of the aeroplanes are pretty dirty. So I basically use this technique just for the bottom of the aeroplane. And then once you're done, the brush will wash out in water. So I don't know if you got the brand there. Now these come in thousands of different colors, thousands. So
just put it back under the light a bit more.
Yeah. So I'm using burnt sienna, just black. And then this sienna color, which was the color I just used, is called raw sienna. Winsor & Newton, everybody's probably heard of them. They're a pretty popular brand, and they're not terribly expensive. I want to say these are about $5 or $6 a tube, but they last forever. I mean, that tube would last, you know, 30, 40 aeroplanes. So because it's so concentrated. Okay, so the next technique I'm going to show you is, you know, I was a airbrush artist, and I was taught by a lovely gentleman. His name was Dick, and he was brilliant at airbrushing, and I was probably 16 and he was in his 70s. He was actually in World War II. He was a prisoner of war in the Japanese prison camp. Had some pretty crazy stories he shared with me, but he taught me a lot about airbrushing, so it's really, really come in handy when I've been doing some modeling stuff. Basically what I showed you is using the airbrush to apply paint, but you can do a lot more with an airbrush. So I'm going to show you some basics. I think you guys can do this. It doesn't require any special skills, just like everything, a little training and technique. And it's basically creating a soft, straight edge. I'm going to mix up a little bit of paint here. I should have had that done. This is just your regular flat black, which I used last week, but it doesn't matter for the sake of this exercise. fix that up. Belinda and I were talking about, man, what are we going to do if we run out of ideas for videos? But then we started making some notes, and we got a lot of cool video ideas we want to do. We want to try and, at least through the winter months, do something every Saturday, just to try and inspire you guys to get down in the shop and do a little building. The next video we're going to do a kind of walkthrough on how you get from file to the laser cutter to making the parts. So I'm going to teach you how to, not how to draw in CAD, but basically the process. Is kind of cool. A lot of people want to know about it, so I'm going to kind of do a little kind of walkthrough of that. Okay, so basically, if you want to create an edge, and let's say you have a panel line, kind of like masking off, kind of like masking the line for the pastel. You've got a panel line, so let's pretend that line there is the panel line, and there might be some rivets. Didn't think I had to draw today. So that's kind of a panel line on an aircraft. Now, what we want to do is we want to create a soft edge, because we want to kind of bring up the panel line, but we don't want to have it kind of flailing the other side of the edge. So we want what's called a clean edge, but a soft edge. So basically what you do is you spray over the top of the ruler. So, should have cleaned the airbrush. So the trick is, if I spray, I'm going to do it here, if I spray like that, okay, we get a pretty sharp edge. Okay, so that's basically the thickness of the ruler. That's about 1 millimeter. If I lift that up 1/8 of an inch, I get a little softer of an edge. And then if I lift it up and spray over the top of it, and I'm working back to the panel line, I get an even softer edge. So basically, depending on the angle you hold the ruler, you can get a different edge. Now you can see sharp, softer, softer still, and then real soft here where the panel line is. And that's really cool if you want to do a specific airbrushed area like a vent or something where it's like an exhaust coming out of an aircraft. It's good to kind of retain. It's a way to control where you don't want the paint to go without masking, because as soon as you mask, you're going to get a hard edge and that's not going to look realistic. Now, it's not just limited to straight lines. French curves, same deal. You might have something that you want to, it might be a fuel tank hole. You lift that up a little bit, gets a little softer, a little softer again. So I know that, wow, that looks really easy, and it is. I mean, just play around. One of the questions last week, somebody said, is that a double action gun? What they're saying is a single action gun, as soon as you press down, it releases the paint and it releases the air. Now this is called a double action gun, and I do recommend you get a double action gun because it gives you more control. So if I push down on this plunger here, it's letting air but no paint. Then when you pull the plunger back, it's like a throttle, and basically you throttle how much paint's coming out. So if I just pull the trigger back a little bit, you'll see a little bit of paint comes out. If I pull the trigger back a lot of paint comes out. And you've also got adjustments on the needle size, and you can basically adjust how much paint you want coming out ever. I've got a big range. I go from nothing to a lot, but I'm kind of used to using an airbrush. When you're learning, I'd suggest having the needle turned all the way in, just so you don't get too out of control. Now, everyone's like, yeah, well, it's fine spraying it over a piece of cardboard, but, how about doing it on the real thing? So here's a fuel tank. I actually made a mask for that, and it's disappeared. Here it is. Little acetate mask. So here's a fuel tank hatch, and we're just gonna I don't know how that showed up, but you can sort of see. Now I might wipe that, or I probably wouldn't use a real dark black to do that, but for the sake of the exercise, I'm showing you. Now this would probably be, in fact, I think the top of this aircraft's like a steely grey blue colour, so I'd probably use a softer tone just to pull that panel out a little bit and animate it a little bit more. But that's an idea of how you would use this. Same deal if you wanted to grab a rivet line here. You're starting to, I can see the wheels thinking now. So you can paint every panel and kind of get a real nice ripply skin look if you know, which I've done. This is a beautiful wing. This is an Airworld Yak 11, and they have a lot of. It's a great base to work from. But if you look at it, it's basically dead flat. It doesn't have any skin ripplings, so I could do some of this airbrushing just to get some more dimension into the skin. And you'd actually mask off the corners and work inwards. But that gives you a little idea of how to spray. It's called spraying an edge, and you know, all airbrush artists use this technique. And you can do circles as well. You can hold a circle up. I don't have a circle here. That you could use a small circle, and then you just hold it up and then spray through the circle. The closer the circle is, the more defined the line is, etc., etc. Okay, so while I've been talking, I think our raised panel is ready to be relieved. And this, like I said, this was dry pretty quick. We're just going to knock the top off. You just sand it back to the tape edge.
Mike Smith says, I am going to weather my F3J models. Excellent, Pete.
Yeah, it's amazing how people want to weather everything. They're weathering, you know, their cars, their wives, their girlfriends, their dogs. Everything's getting weathered this week. So, you know, I take that as a great compliment. And more importantly, share it with other people. You know, let the world know. You know, the more people make things, I think the better place it'll be. Somebody said, you know, when I was growing up, you know, my dad would say to me every day, "What are you going to make today, son?" And unfortunately, this day and age, a lot of that same conversation is, "What are you going to buy today?" So my MO these days, as you know, kind of retired last January, is teaching people how to make things again. That's kind of my new thing in life. So just going to pull that tape up. Now you can make this thicker or thinner, and I did that really, really fast. Now that's a hard edge. I don't know if you can see that. It's a super harsh edge. That's probably not how it would be, but again, for the sake of the camera, that's what it would look like. Now what we're going to do, showed you how to do this before. Put a couple of rivets on it. Paint it. Let that dry in there, you've got your raised panel. Now obviously that'll be all smooth in the middle, but because I was thrashing, it's not that smooth, but that's how you do it. Drop a couple of rivets on there, a few raised panels, and you've got a little access hatch. Now if you wanted round corners or you wanted it to be a circle, basically you get like a vinyl mask. You can get one of your sign writing companies to cut you some masks. I have all kinds of masks. In actual fact, I can cut vinyl on the laser cutter, so I can make patterns for all the various hatches and so forth on an aircraft. And I'll do that when I'm priming the aircraft. I'll actually put some raised panels and just in the primer coat, just to kind of build it up a little bit, to animate them a little bit more. Because a lot of them are kind of flush. They're just kind of scribed into the skin, and in real life they actually raise a little bit. Now just to close out today, I'm just going to airbrush our rivets here. The raised rivets. Oh crap. Always have the cap on the airbrush. Let me just wipe off that excess there. Don't do this at home, folks. I'm going to use the hair dryer, the heat gun, to dry this off so you can see. I don't know how that, see that in the light, but you can. They show up okay?
There we go.
Super camera woman Belinda Goldsmith here, ladies and gentlemen. I really test her because we just throw this together. There's no like script, there's no planning. We just like, okay, let's see how we can go. So it's definitely authentic.
Very on the fly, ladies and gents.
So that's about it for today. If you've got any questions, now would be the time. I don't want to waste your time, so we don't want to just film for the sake of filming. So any questions, B, or we'll close down and let these guys get back to their day.
Is there a reason for not normally using the heat gun?
Well, yeah, it's called patience. And I'm the most impatient guy on this planet, so the reason, if this is a fiberglass wing or a balsa wing, you could damage the structure underneath by using the heat gun. Now this is a piece of 2mm G10 fiberglass, so I knew I wasn't going to damage that. But I wouldn't recommend using the heat gun unless it's very low heat and you absolutely have to have the paint dry in a hurry. But otherwise, I just let it alone. One of the questions I had last week was, could they see, how the hawk turned out? So we'll probably close with that. I'll bring the hawk, as some of you have been seeing. I've been gearing it up. And it's coming along really well. I haven't quite finished gearing it up. Give you guys an idea. This is half the fuselage. It's quite a big aeroplane. But you can sort of see how the weathering turned out. It's got a nice sort of feel to it. I'm pretty happy with it. I don't know if the detail's coming up or not. We got some sort of rust streaks coming off the ventrals here. In this area, I actually use real oil because there's an oil drip, some kind of oil vent out this hole here, and it's actually cool because it probably doesn't show on the camera, but there's a gloss over the flat. We put the, this is a fuel leveling gauge, so it tells when the aircraft is level for fueling. You can see over I put the graphics on here, the Panther, and you can see how it's got a nice patina from the top as the sun hit it, and then it's kind of got darker down below, using that alcohol over the flat clear that I showed you last week. Install's going well. This is not about install, but I've got the motor in, I've got the fuel system in, and I kind of do it in stages. People kind of look inside jets and they just freak out, but it's basically you've got an air system, a fuel system, and a radio system. It's just same as any other model aircraft. This is your GSU fuel tank, the turbine's back in there. Pretty simple, and maybe one day we'll do a video on the basics of installing a turbine. So that's about it. Hawk's coming along really good. I'm happy with it.
We're getting a lot of thank yous.
No problems. Guys, appreciate all the support. And like I said, the next video we're going to do a walkthrough on laser cutting. I'm going to explain how I draw, and then I'm going to explain the setup of the laser, the different controls you have, how to cut different woods. It's going to be cool. A lot of people want to know about that. So we may do that next Saturday. I'm not sure. We're getting pretty close to Christmas. So if not, that'll be in January sometime. I don't want to overdo this. But anyway, if I don't see you guys, have a wonderful Christmas. And we look forward to the next video in the new year. Take care.